podcast for the 11th Annual Air Quality and Health Workshop. My name is Veda Peters, and I'm here with Dr. Dola Tabari from the University of British Columbia. And we're going to talk about Beijing smog to Kitimat's LNG.
What's it all about?
Yes, exactly. So what are the links between energy policy, air quality, and climate?
So I think most people appreciate that local air quality is often a concern when new energy projects are proposed or development in a region leads to kind of uncontrolled emissions of things that we either initially or later on discover to be pollutants and bad for our health. What's also entered the fray more recently is this concern about climate change, which means that a more carbonaceous fuel like coal should be phased out if we're worried about climate change, and a lighter fuel like methane or natural gas would be a substitute which would reduce the emissions of greenhouse gases associated with that activity by half or more. So that's considered a good. The title of the talk really refers to the fact that we've had an interconnection between energy and environmental policy for at least 1,000 years.
Really?
Yeah, at least 1,000 years. So, for example, the New Forest was established by William the Conqueror in 1076. And it's called the New Forest because the energy demand on wood by that time had mostly deforested all the forests near London already. So the New Forest was a new forest because the old one had been cut down, and it was one of the first national parks ever set up. And it was a national park in the sense that William the Conqueror wanted somewhere where the trees wouldn't be cut down so they could go hunting.
Cool.
Right? So that's 1,000 years ago. We've used energy, and our energy problems have led to an environmental problem that's led to an environmental policy. More recently, we've had King Edward I ban coal from use in London because of all the smoke it created. Can you guess when that was? Edward I.
I'm thinking 14th century Black Plague.
1306. Really good. Well done. That's
Thank
wonderful. And more recently still, we've because coal is so cheap and so valuable as the primary energy that motivated the Industrial Revolution, we were unable to get rid of coal until air pollution events that plagued Pennsylvania in the late 40s. 47, there's the Donora event, and in London called the Black Fog, or the Smog, which killed thousands of people in 52, I think it was.
Yeah.
Those events led to a policy that said we shouldn't have smoky fuels in urban areas. In the UK, it led to gasification of coal and the introduction of town gas and the introduction of smokeless fuels. And in North America, it led to the introduction of natural gas pipelines. So that's how our systems have co-evolved through time. Today, people are arguing that air pollution in Beijing, we know that air pollution in Beijing is really bad, that cities like Beijing are going to rule out the use of coal for power generation or industrial activity in their airsheds. And this is claimed to be this huge virgin market for LNG from Canada.
Because they need a cleaning burning fuel.
Because they need a cleaning burning fuel. So there are two aspects to this. Will there be improvement to local air quality in Beijing? Yeah. Will it have a positive effect on greenhouse gas emissions? No, it's a wash. Because there's a lot of energy and fugitive greenhouse gases on the way from from extracting the gas and then compressing it and then shipping it over to China. And then the last part of my talk is really about how poorly regulated that activity is in all its senses in Canada. So there are too many projects going in at the same time, which is why the price has been driven down to very low levels. There is private ownership of all the resource extraction activities, which is why very little of the expatriation of this natural resource will be translated into wealth in a sovereign fund for either BC or for Alberta in the case of their heavy oils and tar sands. And that's really because there's a misunderstanding of what open for business means.
I see.
And so, for example, Norway is open for business, but Norway owns all of its fossil resources, and it is the majority shareholder of all the activities that go on in Norway. And a really good comparison of how we've got it right and we've got it wrong is that Norway is 5 million people. Alberta is 3.5 million people. In Alberta, the sovereign wealth fund stands at $3,500 a person. In Norway, it stands at $200,000 a person. And so not only are we failing, as has been demonstrated by many of the speakers that have gone before, in putting together an adequately comprehensive and trustable environmental protection regime and risk management, we are also failing on the economic side to, if you're going to do this, to extract the right rent for it and to make sure that the benefits flow to the peoples of Canada, British Columbia, and Alberta in particular. So that's more or less the summary of my talk.
So it's not just a provincial issue.
No.
It has global implications.
In the Canadian sense, it has a complete mishmash of federal and provincial and regional jurisdictional issues. And I'm not responsible, that person is responsible. Inadequate funding for monitoring, enforcement, regulating, assessing, engaging the public, absence of transparent decision-making processes. I call it tiers. There is no transparency, there is no, anyway, that's in the slide.
Does that happen partly because Canada is a huge country in terms of area and everybody
No, I don't think so. No, it's purely, it's legal jurisdictional challenges. And I actually think, for example, our speaker earlier today, let me try and look up his name, the guy who spoke about coal.
Dr. Dalton?
No, Dr. Dalton talked about...
Or Van Binder.
Yeah, Dr. Van Binder. Dr. Van Binder gave a really good example of what the challenges are in the sense that the Health Act, his authority only comes into act and to be able to exert it once there is a health effect, rather than in a predictive manner which can be used to manage that potential health effect. I had the same experience with the ICBC a couple of months ago. There is a crossing near my house where one of the roads coming at the crossing cannot see the other oncoming cars. It is the one that has the stop sign, but it cannot see the cars even from its stop sign. While the other route, which doesn't have a stop sign, just comes and goes, right? So the only way you can actually make sure that you are going into a clear intersection is to go into an intersection and hope that it's clear. So I asked the ICBC to please put a stop sign there and to reverse it so that the people who can see get the stops and the people who can't see don't. And they said they need 2 accidents at that intersection before they can flip the stop sign. And this is exactly the kind of thing that we're running into.
But there are lessons that we can learn from others.
Lots. I mean, I think this is addressable if the federal and provincial and other government levels came together and decided to treat this as an integrated system, to divide up the responsibility and to be responsible jointly and severally, right? It meant that if someone gets it wrong, we get them all to fall on their swords. I would like that a lot because there are lots of falling on swords to be done.
Okay, I believe you've answered my questions. Possibly not directly, but I think they're all answered.
Go on, ask the rest of them and you can edit them in if I didn't answer them.
Is there a role that global air quality climate issues play in BC decision making?
Local air quality.
Global, but not
local. Air quality is not a global issue. Okay? Air quality locally influences markets for different types of fuel. And that influence on different types of fuel will certainly impact the desirability of exports of cleaner substitutes of either technology or fuel into that market.
Okay, so if LNG is a cleaner fuel,
Yeah.
then that plays into our decision-making process?
Yeah. Yeah, and so what you do is their air pollution problem creates a market for our LNG exports, as well as LNG exports from anybody else, as well as clean coal technologies from anybody else.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
I think so.
Okay. It's a little bit more complicated than the way the question is asked.
It's a lot more complicated, I think, than a lot of people think.
Okay.
So I think...
What's the next one?
I think we got them all.
So, role of processing, transportation, extraction we see from a global perspective.
Talked about that.
Yeah, no, it's just in the wash.
Yeah.
If we have a good institution for monitoring and enforcement of our best practices, we could in fact generate LNG with a global GHG benefit. But we don't have such a mechanism in place. We don't have enforcement. We have very lax regulations and zero enforcement.
Are those possibilities?
They're possible. It just needs the government to...
Just needs will.
it needs a government with some backbone.
All right. Probably sounds like a good place to stop.
Okay.
Thank you very
Sure.
much.
My pleasure.